Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Shane, and I am the Executive Director of the Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center, and on behalf of the museum's board of trustees, our staff, and our volunteers, I'd like to thank you all for joining us on this very special day, June 6, 2024, the 80th anniversary of D-Day. We are honored to recognize some very special guests who are with us here for this morning's event. First and foremost, our distinguished veterans from all branches of the military, both active and retired, including a special group who served during World War II here from the New Jersey Memorial Veterans Home at Paramus. Larry Berra, son of iconic New York Yankee and United States Navy Seaman Second Class Yogi Berra. Larry Doby Jr., son of barrier-breaking Hall of Famer and United States Navy Seaman Larry Doby. Lindsay Berra, granddaughter of the great Yogi Berra. Esteemed program participants, members of the community here in the museum, and those viewing this tribute remotely. Thank you all for joining us. We're here this morning to remind ourselves of what our country and its allies were able to achieve in defense of freedom and democracy 80 years ago today. D-Day was truly a monumental enterprise, arguably the largest and most complex single operation in human history. The effort to launch a force of more than 1 million men across the English Channel on more than 3,000 planes and more than 7,000 ships. But here in Yogi Berra's museum, most potently, we recall that the enormous collective effort that took place on June 6, 1944 was made up of individuals each with their own personal history, family, and faith. Yogi Berra was one of those individuals. And so our museum's mission to sustain Yogi's legacy and values for a new generation feels especially compelling today, when we remember him not in pinstripes, but in his Navy uniform, 19 years old, manning a machine gun on a 36-foot rocket boat, ordered to remain within 300 yards of Normandy shores and pound German machine gun nests with rockets so that the soldiers who were landing could have a better chance of survival. Pulling some of those soldiers from the water in the days that followed, and then carrying that experience with him for the rest of his life. Yogi went on to the legendary career we all know so well, the 10 World Series championships with the New York Yankees, the 3 MVP plaques that you can see here in our museum, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. But he always said that his proudest achievement was his service to his country. And today, along with the rest of the free world, we remind ourselves of why that was. I'm proud to share that another individual who stepped onto the beach in Normandy in 1944 is with us here today in person. It is my tremendous honor to begin our program by recognizing Technical Sergeant Alger Stone, together with his family. Is a reminder of why he, like Yogi, and like so many others who risked their lives for our freedoms, others of whom are with us here today, will forever be known as the greatest generation. Inducted in April of 1943 at the age of 19, Mr. Stone shipped out on the USS America from Boston to Liverpool, England. He returned home on November 25, 1945, on the SS Mariposa. And here is just some of what Alger Stone did during his 2.5 years overseas. He landed on the beach in Normandy in September of 1944. While on patrol with one other GI, he successfully captured 100 German soldiers and brought them back to Allied territory. After crossing the Roer River, he led a unit that liberated a Nazi concentration camp that held several thousand starving Russian and Polish prisoners. And as part of Patton's Third Army, he pursued the retreating German forces through Liège and Cologne to vital battles in Dortmund, Hamm, and Beckum. In recognition of these wartime achievements, Mr. Stone received the Bronze Medal for the Bronze Star Medal for exemplary conduct in ground combat against an armed enemy, a Purple Heart for shrapnel wounds received in action in France, a Combat Infantry Badge, a Sharpshooter Medal, the European, African, Middle Eastern Theater ribbon with 3 Bronze Stars for service in Central Europe, the Rhineland, and Northern France, a Good Conduct Medal, and the World War II Victory Medal. And I'm not done yet. Mr. Stone also received a letter of commendation on the 16th of April, 1945 from Lieutenant General George S. Patton for being one of the so-called Iron Men of Metz, for taking part in 14 days of continuous combat in intolerable weather conditions, including rain, flooding, and bitter cold, and capturing the city of Metz during the Battle of the Bulge in October 1944. He received another letter of commendation in May of 1945 from Lieutenant General W.H. Simpson for crossing the Moselle and Lippe rivers at flood stage under enemy fire in order to capture the enemy stronghold, the Ruhr Pocket. 20,000 prisoners were captured during that 12-day battle. As I said, the greatest generation. This morning, 80 years after D-Day, we have the privilege of witnessing Mr. Stone receive the New Jersey Distinguished Service Medal with oak leaf cluster, presented to him on behalf of the New Jersey Department of Military and Veterans Affairs by Chief Warrant Officer Luisa Sanchez. Please welcome Chief Warrant Officer Luisa Sanchez.
Good morning, everyone. It's also an honor to be here. Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. On behalf of the New Jersey Admin General and the Department of Military Veterans Affairs, it is an honor for me to be here. I am retired Chief Warrant Officer Luisa Sanchez. And let's start the ceremony. I have here a letter from the Governor's office. Here, so I can read it to you. On behalf of the state of New Jersey, I thank you for your service to the residents of the state and the nation. All Americans owe a tremendous debt of gratitude and appreciation to our brave veterans who risked their lives to protect our freedoms and defend our way of life. Your duty service to our country during World War II makes you a deserving recipient for the Distinguished Service Medal with cluster Purple Heart. The New Jersey Distinguished Service Medal is presented to combat veterans returning from conflict to honor and acknowledge the debt the state owed them for their service. It is New Jersey's highest military award. It is humbling to be able to again recognize you for your service. Please accept my sincere appreciation for your service to both our state and nation. My very best, Phil D. Murphy, Governor. We also have a citation from the Governor, and this is awarded to Technical Sergeant Oliver C. Stone. Citation. The Governor of the State of New Jersey, Philip D. Murphy, under the authority of 38A 15-2 New Jersey Revised Statutes, award the Distinguished Service Medal with oak leaf cluster to Technical Sergeant Alger G. Stone for distinguished service in the U.S. Army during World War II. It is signed by Governor Phil D. Murphy. few things here. We also have the award. So those of you who are able to stand up, military, attention to orders. The Governor and the Adjutant General, on behalf of the people of the state of New Jersey, and in accordance with applicable law, presents the following award. The New Jersey Distinguished Service Medal is presented to Technical Sergeant Albert Stone for his service during World War II. I will come to you. Will you come? Would you like to come up? Yeah.
Thank you, Chief Bornos. I'm now happy to introduce, we thought it was over, it's not quite over yet. I'm happy to introduce Willie Holba, Military and Veterans Liaison for the Office of Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill.
Hi everyone, my name is Willie. I work for, thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Willie. I work for Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill. Unfortunately, she sends her regrets. She wasn't able to join us today. But Mr. Stone, she did want me to send something, a token of her appreciation on this 80th anniversary of D-Day. So I'll come over there. I think I can just be loud enough. Mr. Stone, the Congresswoman would like to present you with a flag that was flown over the Capitol. That was flown over the Capitol. I'll read the certificate from her as well. Everyone can hear me, right, without the mic? The 11th Congressional District of the great state of New Jersey presents this flag flown over the United States Capitol to honor Alger Stone, Be it known that the undersigned member of Congress, the Honorable Mikey Sherrill, presents this flag to honor Alger Stone upon the occasion of the 80th anniversary of D-Day in deep gratitude for his dedicated service to our country during World War II. Signed, Mikey Sherrill, member of Congress.
Thank you, Mr. Polo. Oh, of course.
And then, additionally, the Congresswoman wanted to present a certificate in honor of the museum for all the work that the museum does in honoring our veterans. I'll go ahead and read this real quick and present it to you. So again, the 11th Congressional District of the great state of New Jersey celebrates the Yogi Berra Museum. Be it known that the undersigned member of Congress, the Honorable Mikey Sherrill, celebrates the Yogi Berra Museum for their commitment to preserving the memory of Yogi Berra and his service to our country upon the occasion of the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Signed, Mikey Sherrill, member of Congress.
Congratulations, Mr. Stone. Thank you for your service. Doesn't begin to express the profound depth of gratitude I know every person watching feels about what you did for all of us. We're now moving on to the second part of our program, and I'm very happy to introduce today's panel, who I invite to join us center stage. Rear Admiral Sam Cox. Of Naval History and Heritage Command since 2014. He graduated with distinction from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1980 and served as a Naval Intelligence Officer for 33 years. His last assignment before retiring was Commander of the Office of Naval Intelligence. Admiral Cox is currently responsible for all aspects of the Navy's official history programs, including the historic submarine Nautilus, maintenance of the USS Constitution, 1,100 display aircraft, and the Navy's underwater archaeology program. His awards include the National Intelligence Distinguished Service Medal, the Bronze Star, and 4 Navy unit commendations, among many others. Paul Stillwell is a retired naval officer who served on active duty during the Vietnam War. He has been a fan of the St. Louis Cardinals since 1954. Yogi was from St. Louis, so we will allow that. In 1974, after short stints in professional sports public relations, he joined the staff of the U.S. Naval Institute in Annapolis. During his 30 years there, he was a magazine editor and oral historian. He is author, editor, and co-author of 13 books. The New York Times selected his 1993 The Golden 13, Recollections of the First Black Naval Officers, as one of the most notable books published that year in naval history. His most recent book, published in 2021, is Battleship Admiral, The Life of Vice Admiral Willis A. Lee, Jr., which received the Samuel L. Morrison Award for Naval Literature. Stillwell is now at work on a book on history, the history of the battleship New Jersey, which he served, and he has seen a lot of baseball games. Our panel moderator is retired Rear Admiral Sonny Masso, who most recently served as the Executive Director of the Naval Historical Foundation for 5 years. He served as a Navy Surface Warfare Officer after graduation from the University of Mississippi's Naval ROTC program. Rear Admiral Masso served on a similar panel at our museum 2 years ago with former Secretary of the Navy, Ray Mavis, author Luke Eplin, and Yogi's eldest son, who's with us today, Larry Berra. As Executive Director of the Naval Historical Foundation, Rear Admiral Masso produced over 80 programs focusing on Navy history on YouTube called the Naval Historical Foundation's Second Saturday program. He worked in close coordination with his son, Colin, who produced each program. Rear Admiral Masso served 32 years in the Navy and received 11 personal awards, but he is most proud of the meritorious unit citation his command received after the attack on the Pentagon on September 11, 2001. Rear Admiral Masso claims that 80% of his brain is filled with the music lyrics and sports trivia. Gentlemen, over to you.
Thank you very much. And the 80%, it may be higher, but that's my way of saying I've seen a lot of baseball too. Thank you, Eve, for your warm introduction. It's a great honor for Paul, Rear Admiral Cox, and I to be here this morning. We are honored also to be present during the special recognitions received to both Alger Stone and the museum. I, for one, am delighted to be in the presence of Lindsay and Larry Berra. Nice to see you again, Lindsay. I've already visited with Larry, and I'm very pleased to make the acquaintance this morning earlier of Larry Doby's son, Larry Doby Jr. And I'm very much on board with July 5th being a special day of recognition in Major League Baseball for your late father, and where all players wear number 14. And that's a passion of mine, and so any way I can help you, let me know. I wholeheartedly endorse this heroic and Hall of Fame location, and one thing that can be said about our panel is we're no strangers to one another. We've spoken together on YouTube programming, other events, and we've already discussed this. You can look up one of our shows. It's called Naval Historical Foundation Second Saturday Batter Up, and we spent a great amount of time kind of laser focused on Navy and Marine Corps Major League Baseball players who served in World War II. But today we get to expand it to include Army and others, and we're delighted to do that. To kick our discussion off, the first question is for Rear Admiral Sam Cox, and I'm going to ask him to provide a geopolitical context from Pearl Harbor to D-Day. Sam, over to you, sir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First, I'd like to pay my respects to the veterans and especially to their families for their sacrifice. Is yours on? Anyways, come on. Hey, my respects to the veterans and especially to their families for the sacrifice that they made that enabled those veterans to serve. Even before Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the senior leadership of the British and the Americans were engaged in discussions about what if the United States were to join in the war, and what were the war aims if that were to occur. And the British Prime Minister Churchill and American President Roosevelt met on a British battleship off of Newfoundland to kind of lay those ideas out. And then after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Churchill wasted no time in hauling the entire British General Staff leadership over to Washington, D.C. to lock in the ideas that they had discussed, that despite the Japanese attack, the grand strategy for the United States and the Allies was to defeat Germany first, hold Japan in the Pacific, which didn't go well, but defeat Germany first. One of the first things, and as a result of those discussions, even before Pearl Harbor, the United States Navy was engaged in an undeclared shooting war with German U-boats in the Atlantic, even before Pearl Harbor. But the U-boat threat had to be defeated before an invasion of Europe was possible. And that took until about May of 1943 before that tide turned against the U-boats due to the results of improved technology, the Allies' ability to read German codes and know where the U-boats were and send the convoys where they weren't. And that would enable the massive supply and amount of American troops that crossed the Atlantic, very few of which were actually sunk by German U-boats. While this is going on, there's discussion between the British and the Americans, primarily bringing in allies as necessary, as to one, when do you invade Europe, and where do you invade Europe? The Americans, under Chief of Staff General Marshall, wanted to go into Europe in 1942. The British, though, not so fast. They still remembered the Somme from World War I, with 20,000 dead British for a few hours in a matter of a day. They preferred, the British wanted to, let's let the Russians wear down the Germans for a few years before we do this. Stalin, who was a leader of Russia, wasn't too keen on this idea, and so he repeatedly advocated for an Allied landing on the Western Front as soon as possible, and he periodically would threaten to drop out of the war if the Germans didn't force him out first, which would result in millions of German soldiers being freed up to oppose a landing in the West. The American view of what the British were doing was basically beating around the bush. As Churchill came up with ideas, well, let's invade Sicily, let's invade Italy, let's invade Greece, let's invade the Dodecanese Islands, and you're all going, where the hell is that? Which was the American approach. These meetings, you have lots of pictures of the Allied leaders all smiling and shaking hands and all this stuff. The meetings could actually be pretty contentious. And one of the biggest food fights was over how to divvy up the LSTs, or landing ship tanks, which is a new type of ship which didn't exist before World War II, that could land tanks right onto a beach. There were very few of those, although the numbers were growing, but constant, who gets those first? Some of the discussions got pretty heated. General Stilwell described a meeting that involved the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral King, and the Chief of the Imperial General Staff, Sir Alan Brooke, and Stilwell described it as Brooke got nasty, King got good and sore. He practically went across the table at him. God, I wish he'd socked him. That was the harmonious Allied approach to the war. Anyway, they eventually decided at the Quebec Conference in August of 1943 that the landings would occur in 1944, and at the Cairo Conference later in 1943, they set the date which finally satisfied Stalin that we would invade Europe in June of 1944. Then the discussion of where exactly do you land. The traditional way to invade Europe or England, whichever way you went, was at Pas-de-Calais at Dover, the northern end of the English Channel, which is the shortest distance to Germany, shortest across the Channel, has a port. Problem is, the Germans, it's obvious to them too. So then the ports on the Biscay Bay side of France, on the west side, susceptible to German U-boat attacks, out of range of many Allied fighters, and as far as you can get from Germany in France. So then it becomes Normandy. The problem with Normandy is bad tides, bad weather, beaches that, particularly at Omaha Beach, which was one of the 5 selected, highly defensible terrain. The United States gets assigned to Utah Beach, which is the farthest to the west, and Omaha Beach, which is the next, and then British and Canadian forces take the other 3. Now, the American force for Utah Beach is established late because it's a late ad. And as they're doing a rehearsal for the landings in April of 1944, that goes really, really bad. There's a friendly fire incident in which the live fire part of the exercise lands on live troops. And then German torpedo boats get in among one of the convoys for this, sink 2 LSTs and blow the stern off another. So there's about 500 Army soldiers that are killed during this and almost 200 Navy sailors, which is actually more casualties than would actually occur on Utah Beach during the invasion of Normandy. Now, the flagship of this operation is the Bayfield, which is mostly Coast Guard manned. It's a transport ship, but on board that ship is Yogi Berra as a gunner's mate. And he's assigned to one of the small rocket boats, which fires about a dozen rockets, 6-man crew. He mans a machine gun on that. I'll leave it to Paul to discuss exactly what Yogi does on D-Day. But the landing starts off kind of bad, nowhere near as bad as what happens at Omaha Beach. If any of you see Saving Private Ryan, that kind of gets close, but it's actually worse than that. Utah, not so bad, but still stiff German resistance. And at that point, I've gone how we got to D-Day and Utah, so your next question.
Thank you, Stan. Well, please regale us with where Major League Baseball was at the time of the break of the war, including anecdotes about Yogi's service, as well as Bob Feller's quick action on December 7th, 1941.
Thank you, Sonny, and I want to begin by saluting the veterans among us. I am in awe of you gentlemen. You were the inspiration for those of us who served in the later war. And thank you so much for your service. When World War II started, there was some question whether baseball would continue to be played because the options were serving in the armed forces or working in an essential war industry. Farming was considered an essential industry because of feeding the nation, feeding the troops wherever they were. So the commissioner of baseball was a man named Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, and he sent a letter to President Roosevelt and said, what is our status going forward in this war? And President Roosevelt generously responded with what was called a green light letter, essentially giving baseball a status as an essential industry because it provided recreation and relaxation for the people who were working in the war industries and otherwise serving the country. And so that was a license to continue. Now I want to get to Yogi in particular. I grew up in southwest Missouri, a fan of the Cardinals, and Yogi was from the Hill, a neighborhood in South St. Louis. One of his best friends before he could do that, the Army officer, Navy officer said, well, I'm sorry, but paperwork's already started. You're in the Navy. So he went to basic training at Bainbridge, Maryland, and then was assigned to this amphibious warfare unit at Little Creek, Virginia. As the Admiral has said, he was assigned to a 36-foot-long rocket craft. And the idea was to go in close. Yogi claimed that they got so close it was like the distance from home plate to Fenway Park in Boston. You know, that's an exaggeration. It was probably about 300 yards, maybe less than 100 yards to Fenway Park. But he got assigned to this, and his task as a seaman second class was to load rockets onto the launchers, and it was called an LCCS. It was made partially of wood and partially of metal. And Yogi said that we were considered expendable. That's a great mindset which to go into a battle. But when you get orders, you have to follow them. And so they went from Boston to Nova Scotia, then to Halifax and Glasgow, Scotland, and finally to Plymouth, England on the south coast. Sort of interesting connection there. We've heard of Plymouth Rock, where the Pilgrims came ashore in New England. Well, it was named after Plymouth, England, and that was the site of gathering all these ships and craft, hundreds of them, to go across the channel on the invasion date of June 6, 1944. At that time, I was about 6 weeks old, so everything I know about D-Day has come vicariously and after the fact. So they were put on the Bayfield, as the Admiral mentioned, attack transport. The Bayfield carried a lot of boats, landing craft, LCVPs, and then they carried these 6 rocket boats. And 18-year-old Yogi later used vivid language to describe the scene. It was scary, but really something to see. I didn't know enough to be scared. That's kind of a contradiction. It was really scary, but he didn't know enough to be scared. I had my head up over the side of the boat all the time, looking around like it was 4th of July in Forest Park, and after the fireworks, we were going to go over and get some hot dogs and Cokes. I should add parenthetically that Forest Park is a well-known landmark in St. Louis. It was the site of the 1904 World's Fair that inspired the song Meet Me in St. Louis, Louis. The disappointment on D-Day was no hot dogs and Cokes, but they did their job. They fired the rockets. He was later sent to North Africa, Bizerte, and they were preparing for the invasion of southern France. And by this time, Yogi had received an advancement from Seaman 2nd to Seaman 1st, $84 a month. That's a low price for all the courage that these men displayed on that occasion. But it was a different time. Later conceded during the August 15th invasion of southern France at Marseille that he was more scared then than at D-Day, because at the first invasion he didn't know what to expect. And now he did, and it was frightening. During the barrage, he got hit by a bullet from a German machine gun. He himself manned a 50 caliber machine gun, earned a Purple Heart for the wound. Once the American forces secured the area, the townspeople came forward to their liberators. They waved flowers, bottles of wines, while singing La Marseillaise.
Sam, kind of connecting all the dots here, how did the start of war change the American way of life shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor?
Well, prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor, the American population was deeply divided. between those who wanted absolutely no part of this war, probably that was the majority, and others who, supported England, but generally didn't want to get involved in the war either. Pearl Harbor radically changed overnight that whole mindset. But the people wanted to go after Japan. Japan was the one who attacked us, not Germany. Roosevelt had already made this under-the-table deal with the British that we're going to go after Germany first. Germany solved this problem by declaring war on us, which then enabled us to go both ways. But the result after Pearl Harbor was such a shock that the American people were all in. It was like a switch.
Had a 56-game winning streak. Ted Williams hit .406. That's the last time that has been done in the major leagues. He had a difficult personality, but he was a class act in regard to his batting average going into the last games against the Philadelphia Athletics was .399 something, and would round up to 400. And he said, I'm not going to sit out and get that record artificially. And so he went doubleheader. They lost the first game in St. Louis, then they won the next four, including the finale at Yankee Stadium. And after that, the players began going into the military service, and the quality of baseball just degraded considerably. They had a young pitcher, Nuxall, in 1944, was only 15 years old when he made his debut. And sometimes the old, the halt, and the lame. And in 1945, or 44, I should preface, the St. Louis Browns won the World Series. And this never happened before or since. but there was a book about it that wrote, even the Browns could win the World Series in a year when the talent was so depleted. The following year, 1945, the Browns brought up a one-armed outfielder named Pete Gray, and he was remarkably adept at catching the ball, flipping the glove off, and throwing with his left hand. He had done well as a hitter in the minor leagues, but in St. Louis, the American League pitchers were crafty enough to throw him curves, change-ups, and he would swing too soon and miss. But 1945 was the nadir, and that was the only year in a 5-year span that the Cardinals did not win the National League pennant. And that's because the great Stan Musial, my boyhood hero, was called into the Navy and played baseball. The idea was to entertain the troops in various places. And he later said that the fans came to watch home runs, and he decided he would move closer to the plate, and that gave him more power. And he wound up with 475 major league home runs, just short of Lou Gehrig's 493.
Do you mind piling on with Bob Feller? There's a great story on driving in his car, going to Chicago with his dad, I believe, and he's going to join the Navy, right? Go tell the story.
He's probably the first ball player to sign up for World War II. And the man who enlisted him was G. Tunney, who had been heavyweight boxing champion back in the 1920s. There was a famous Tunney-Dempsey fight in which they had a long count that allowed Tunney to get up. So he was a lieutenant commander in the Naval Reserve. He gave the oath to Bob Feller right after Pearl Harbor. And Tunney supervised a program of athletic training for petty officers in the Navy. They were known as the Tunney Fish, partially an Un on his name, and there was also a submarine named the Tunney. And Bob Feller was in that program for a while, but patriotic as he was, he wanted to get into combat, which he did not have to, and this says a lot about the man's character. He went aboard the battleship Alabama. He was a chief petty officer. He was in command of a 40-millimeter gun crew as the battleship shot down Japanese planes. Years afterward, he wound up with 266 Major League victories, I believe. And people said, don't you regret that you had to go away during the war? And you might have had more than 300. He said he didn't regret it all because his service in the Navy in World War II was the top achievement of his entire life.
Thank you. So when I come to this special place, and I consider it the four-letter word, holy, I consider this a holy place. And when I look up there, you know, my whole life flashes before me. And these are the 10 championships that Yogi has that phenomenal photograph of all the rings. But in 1948, the Cleveland Indians defeated the Boston Braves, and chief among the very first African-American to hit a World Series home run was Larry Doby's father, Larry Doby Jr.'s father, Larry Doby, and he was instrumental in that 48 Cleveland pennant. So if we kind of flash and go forward here, 50, 51, so 52. So in 54, we bring back the Cleveland Indians who were playing the New York Giants. And then in 55, those were my Dodgers. That was the year of my birth. But of course, the Dodgers, Johnny Podger's phenomenal 7th game. 56 was Don Larson's perfect game. 57, Milwaukee Braves won the championship that year. 58, we're back. 59, Chicago White Sox, Los Angeles Dodgers. 1960, this was an interesting one because this is the only World Series that Whitey Ford didn't start game 1. And Whitey Ford, to this second in time, is not happy about that. I mean, he does believe, and I think, Casey was gone after that because they didn't win. They lost to Pittsburgh, and of course that was the famous walk-off by Bill Mazeroski. And then, of course, we go to 61, 62. But if you carry that thread on, 63, the Dodgers, 4 straight over the Yankees. 64, the Cardinals, played the Yankees. 65, kind of maneuvered past the Yankee heritage. But look at that. Shy of maybe the Boston Celtics, I think they won 11. There's no better franchise in any sport than what we see right here. And Yogi was a principal contributor to all of those championships. So anyway, I digress, but it touches me when I see all that. So Sam, many ball players served in combat action in places like the Ulithi Atoll. A lot of Major League Baseball players. Major League Baseball players served in Guam, the Republic of the Philippines, and on Navy vessels. Can you help us visualize these theaters of operation and experiences many of these service members would have seen?
Well, I suspect that there was more baseball playing in the Pacific Theater than in the European Theater. and it's, all combat is horrific. So it's hard to say, well, which is worse. In the Pacific, there were a number of campaigns on land, the New Guinea, Philippines, Okinawa at the end, that dragged on for many, many months. But in general, it would frequently be invade an island, and there'd be several days of intense combat, lots of people killed in a short period of time. And then there'd be rest and recuperation before you'd hit the next island and then go through this cycle. So a place like Ulithi, which is an atoll in the middle of nowhere with a big lagoon that you could fit hundreds of ships that would be safe from submarines trying to get in. And he would have the time in between these different island invasions in order to play baseball to pass the time. The European theater was different in the sense that essentially the combat never stopped. Once they came ashore at Normandy, they're in the hedgerow country, which is where every field is surrounded by hundreds of years of rocks that have been built up in hedges. So every field is a fortress that our folks have to fight their way through. And they had to fight across France, fight across Germany. It never ends. Combat was continuous. People would go back for short periods of rest and recuperation. But in general, it was probably, in terms of having any time to do anything that didn't involve killing people, was worse in the European theater than in the Pacific.
Thank you. Paul, speaking of the Ulithi Atoll, many ball players served there, including, the center fielder of the Brooklyn Dodgers, Duke Snider, and of course, the great song "Willie, Mickey, and the Duke" comes to mind. But Duke served on a tender, submarine tender. Do you mind sharing some stories about his service there for the audience?
Well, I certainly will, but Sonny, I'd like to interject before that, just my relationship with Yogi, which was very brief, but I still have baseball cards from 1954, Yogi, my first year as a fan. And I saw him play in 1961 in Whiskey Park in Chicago. Roger Maris hit one of his 61 home runs that game. And saw him play in Yankee Stadium in 62. Later, went to dinner in Washington, D.C., put on the Navy Memorial, and Yogi was presented with the Lone Sailor Award, which is a high honor for that organization. There were 3 speakers. Fred Smith, the founder of FedEx, was the first. Talked about his Marine Corps service, how that helped him as a businessman. Then there was Leonard Lauder of the Lauder Cosmetics chain. He said his service as a Navy supply officer was instrumental in learning business. And finally was Mr. Berra. The other 2 were most eloquent and polished. Yogi and Yogi. down to earth, to the point. Yes, I was in the Navy. We went over, we fought, we did what we had to, we won the war, and we came home. I got to shake Yogi Berra's hand, and I am so pleased by that. Luke Snyder was on a submarine tender out in the Pacific. As many of unfortunate base runner discovered, he had a great throwing arm. He was a fireman second class, which is about as low as you can go in the engineering parts of the ship. And he was on mess cooking, which is akin to KP in the Army. And he would be washing dishes. One of them was broken, he would just throw it out the porthole, move on to the next one. His teammate, or his shipmates, and shipmate is a hallowed word in the U.S. Navy, knew about his special skill, talent with his right arm. And they would make bets with the submarine crews that came along to be serviced by this tender. I said, we have got a sailor in this ship that can throw a ball so far that it'll go over your entire submarine. So the submariners thought, well, this can't possibly be true. The submarine was 312 feet long. So they go out, they place their bets, and Yogi would get, Luke Snyder would get $50 off the top of the first performance. He'd throw the ball well over the submarine, and his shipmates would profit from it.
Isn't that a great story? So I grew up in Los Angeles, and my first ball game I attended in person was in 1964, featuring my beloved Dodgers and the Milwaukee Braves, where Warren Spahn squared off against Don Drysdale. It was an amazing experience for me, as I admired Eddie Matthews, Hank Aaron, and Spahn immensely. Still a Dodger fan, but those players were real special to me. And growing up in LA, you know, we do not like the Giants, okay? We just don't. And like is a polite word, okay? So, but Willie Mays was one of those players where you hate the Giants, but nobody hated Willie. You know, you've probably felt that way about certain players on other ball clubs. Stan Musial, how do you hate that guy? You know, when he was playing prolifically with with St. Louis. But I met Warren Spahn at a card show, and he still was smoking Lucky Strikes. And they kicked him out, and they sent him out the back door, and I went with him. And I was able to ask him about his Army experience where he served in Patton's Third Army. And he earned a Bronze Star and 2 Purple Hearts. And I asked him about this comment because he was asked if he hadn't served the 3 years in the war, did he think he could have, and it was much like what Paul said earlier, do you think he could have won 400 games instead of 363, which is makes him the winningest left-handed pitcher in baseball history? Cy Young is a right-handed pitcher; he would be the right-hander, and he opined, and he said it to me. I'd read it before, but he said it to me that if he hadn't served in the war, he wouldn't have won 363 games. And he also said, in his mouth to my ear, that stress is not having runners at second and third with no one out. You know, and doesn't it really go to context? You know, and so, hey, be thinking about some questions you guys might have, because I'm going to come to you here in a minute. Because this panel is as good as it gets, and I'm sure you have some things that we may not have covered. But anyway, without my service, I wouldn't have won 363 games. And by the way, this game that I attended, the Dodgers won 4-0 thanks to Wally Moon and Rocky Colavito. Did any of you know that Rocky was on the Dodgers? Yeah, I mean, he was a Tiger, an Indian, you know, that kind of thing. But in this game, but Warren pitched a complete game. So did Don Drysdale. And even in his 40s, the next year he would be traded to the San Francisco Giants, and then he ended his career, I think, as a Met. But anyway, I digress. Paul, back to you. We're in the shadows of Paterson, New Jersey, hometown of Larry Doty. And Paul and I are Mets fans, and again, I urge all of us, if we ever have a voice, to let's celebrate Larry's first day in the major leagues on July 5th, 1947, and let's celebrate by having each ball player wear number 14. But for you, Paul, please share some anecdotes about Navy, about Larry's Navy and baseball career in those early days in Cleveland.
Thanks. He was in Ulithi Atoll, which has been mentioned several times. A picture of him in his Navy uniform. Proud. Jackie Robinson integrated baseball in 1947. Great credit goes to Ranch Rickey for having the vision to do that. And the character of Jackie Robinson, who was a sport athlete and a man of great character. When he was in the Army, he was court-martialed because he refused to go to the back of the bus. This is well before Rosa Parks. And he went to see Ranch Rickey in Brooklyn, and Ranch Rickey said, "You can't let that temper and that competitor show." The great movie 42 says, in other words, he wants you to have the strength of character not to fight back when you get insults, harassment. Well, there was another forward-looking owner. This is Bill Beck, who owned the Cleveland Indians. He was a bit of a maverick. Mentioned Kennesaw Mount Landis, who wrote the Green Light Letter in 1942. He was a die-hard segregationist, and as long as he lived, there would be no African Americans in Major League Baseball. He died in 1944, and his successor was a man named Happy Chandler from Kentucky. And surprisingly, Chandler had an open mind and was willing to go along with this. Beck had intended to buy the Philadelphia Phillies and stock it with Negro League players. And they probably would have done very well, but he was not allowed. So he bought the Cleveland Indians, and he introduced Larry Doby as the first African-American player in the American League. His debut in 1947 was not auspicious, but by 1948 he was a regular, did very well with the ball club, led it to the World Series, despite the fact that some teammates would have nothing to do with them, or perhaps even worse than what they said to him. But he persevered, and I have a mental image that I have revisited numerous times in the clubhouse after one of the victorious games of that 1948 World Series. A white pitcher, Steve Romack, is hugging Larry Doby, and they both have huge grins on their faces. That was a step forward in acceptance, and Steve Romack later in his life paid the price because he received abuse himself for being so close to Doby. Not only was he the first Black American League player, Bill Beck later owned the White Sox and hired Doby to be the second major league manager following Frank Robinson of the Cleveland Indians. So he was a pioneer in more ways than one and a deserved Hall of Fame.
Thank you. And Luke Eplin is an author, and he wrote a phenomenal book about the 48 season. Just an extraordinary book. He was on our panel 2 years ago. And but he features a couple of comments on Larry Doby as well. Leroy Satchel Paige was brought up by Bill Beck to join the team, and they thought it would be a good idea for them to room together. But Larry was a conscientious, health-conscious person that would want to get 8 hours of sleep. He was quiet. He called Helen, his wife, and was really devoted and disciplined, to how he comported himself in his life, but also in how he rested himself and presented himself on the baseball field. Leroy Satchel Paige, not so much. He would hit and burn the midnight oil, you know, and kind of conjured up the, hey, if you're going to hoop with the Owls at night, you need to be able to fly with the Eagles in the day. And it was really incongruent, you know, and I don't know, you know, Larry Jr. could probably tell us the real deal on it. I don't think it was affected a friendship. But generally roommates, you know, kind of find somebody from their own bolt of cloth, as it were. But I just thought that was pretty funny. What are your questions? Does anyone have a question for the panel? Sir?
Yes. You mentioned a lot of what maybe happened had players not served in World War II. And I'm kind of curious as to why you never really spoke about Ted Williams' two wars.
Yeah, well, we were actually going to do that, but it's a great segue. Ted Williams.
Ted Williams enlisted. He did not have to because he was so supportive of his mother. But there was so much bad press about him continuing to play baseball that he did join the Navy. He went through flight training. Ted Williams was blessed with exceptional eyesight and reflexes, which is why he was such a great hitter. And he took to naval aviation like a duck to water. He was so good that he was kept behind in order to teach other pilots coming on. After he took a commission in the Marine Corps, I might add, and he was on his way to combat when the war ended in August 1945. And much to his chagrin, in the Korean War, he was recalled to active duty and went over and flew an F-9F Panther jet and was doing close air ground support. He got shot up, made a crash landing in Korea, and barely escaped with his life. He was in combat in Korea, but not in World War II. The only major leaguer, and this is the answer to a trivia question, who fought in both World War II and Korea was Jerry Coleman, who played for the Yankees.
Rookie of the Year, 1951.
And when he came back from the Korean War, his performance fell off. And he said he never regretted that. His service to his country came first.
What other questions? Yes, sir.
Two men elected into the Hall of Fame, never played baseball, never coached, never managed, or never umpired. Two men.
Do you have their names?
Got it. Who said it?
My dad.
Costello.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Is that you, Lindsay? Did you come up with that? Oh, okay. So I was doing my research, and it was playing in the background a couple of days ago, and I wanted to throw my computer out the window because it was just back. What's on? Just back and forth. Yeah. That's a great contribution.
I had to Google it. I didn't believe it. Who's on first? Go ahead.
Yeah, what's on second? Right. Yes, sir. Thank you for that.
I don't know who's on third.
Yeah.
One of the greatest sports writers of our time, Jerry Eisenberg, has written a new book about Larry Gilby. I wonder if Mr. Stilwell or Mr. Gilby could comment on that book.
I haven't read it yet, so I defer to
Yes,
Mr.
Larry,
Gilby.
what do you say, sir? What are your
I haven't
thoughts?
read it yet either. But Mr. Eisenberg, my father, was a very good friend, and it was a labor of love, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I can't get enough of these books. And if you haven't read Luke Eplin's book on the Cleveland Indians 48 season, because it features Bill Beck in his most colorful manner. And he was a war veteran, and he was trying to recover from his war wound for, a better part of a year. And I think his leg got gangrene, he got it, he was in a hot mess. So, and of course they're in a pennant race. So he basically, almost like it was an outpatient thing, he just runs into the doc's office and says, cut my leg off so I can, move forward in my life. But that's all part of the book, so I think you'd enjoy it as well. Questions in the back? Yes, sir.
I do have a question. So when I go home after this trip back to San Diego, I'm going to talk to my 17-year-old daughter, and I'm going to give her my reasons for why I came all the way out here for this event today. For the gentleman up here, why do you think it's so important that 80 years later we continue to commemorate this day?
Sam, let's start with you, and then Paul, I know you might have some thoughts.
Yeah, I may reference a statue, over here, which depicts an American soldier going into a Nazi death camp to liberate it. And you go, what was the sacrifice for? Why did all these guys die on the beaches and across, going across Europe? And it was to put an end to Nazi tyranny and the Japanese, to put an end to imperial aggression so that we can have the life that we have today. And many, many men, few women died in order to make that happen. So, I was a Cubs fan, so, baseball, Ernie Banks, I can't say that much in my life. But I did want to take an opportunity to honor those who went ashore on this day. 10,000 casualties, 2,500 dead. Some recent scholarship suggests it's actually more like 4,500 dead, mostly on Omaha Beach. It was terrible. By the end of the day, there were 132,000 Allied soldiers on French soil that then went on to liberate France, liberate Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, and stop the horror that the Nazis had brought into this world. That's why I'm here.
Well, I will mention a name that has not come up so far, Adolf Hitler. The man was a monster. The evil he did is unspeakable. We know of the Holocaust, and he had, the Third Reich was in his mind going to rule the world with Aryan citizens. And to put it in a few words, just paraphrasing what the Admiral said, the Allies saved Western civilization. There's great credit to Winston Churchill because there were attempts at a negotiated peace early on. Lord Halifax was an advocate of that. Churchill made his inspiring speeches, we will fight them, the hedgerows, we will fight them in the beaches, wherever. He galvanized that nation, and his example was taken up by the Americans. And the planning was right to go in 1944. The Canadians went in at Dieppe, France in 1942 and got slaughtered. That was the time, that was the place. And the men we salute today and those we remember so well kept Hitler from dominating Europe. And we'll never know what would have happened without their sacrifice and heroism.
Anyone else have a question? Yes, sir.
I visited the World War II Museum in New Orleans, which I think is one of the great museums of the world, not just the United States. And trying to understand about D-Day and such, it seemed like Dwight Eisenhower was a major principal in the success that happened, and I wonder if either gentleman could talk about his contributions to D-Day.
Sam.
Well, Eisenhower probably took the biggest gamble in the history of warfare. Gambling on a weather forecast that indicated that the 6th of June, the invasion was supposed to take place on the 5th. And the weather was bad. Our weather forecasters indicated there would a brief period on the 6th of June where we would be able to do this before the weather got worse. And if we didn't do it then, it was going to take several weeks. And the Germans were already figuring out that this whole Operation Fortitude deception plan was a deception plan. And the reason was because we had better weather forecasting than the Germans did. And Eisenhower took that gamble, and what all he said was, okay, let's go. You know, one of the most probably not eloquent speeches in history, but that gamble paid off. If he hadn't done that, if it had been delayed a month, we still probably would have won, but it would have been a whole lot worse than it was.
Eve, we're about 12:20. I'm going to have some wrap-up comments, and I think, I'll flip it back over to you. So, Sam, is there anything else you'd like to say in terms of a wrap-up?
Yeah, I think the only thing, I kind of with that last one, but you may be wondering why a bunch of Navy guys talking about D-Day, since it's usually in the public mind thought of as an Army thing. Well, actually, under the doctrine of the time, until the senior Army officers were able to establish a headquarters ashore, which didn't take place until late on the 6th of June, D-Day was a Navy operation. It was under Navy command control, Navy admirals making decisions of what to do and when. And there were Navy personnel on all of the beaches, corpsmen, beach masters, doctors, frogmen, guys that blow obstacles, and all of them, for the number that were there, suffered extremely high rates of casualties, as did the Army ashore. And it was also at Omaha Beach. It was the initiative of Navy destroyers that came in close to the beach at great risk that turned the tide of being able to get the Army troops who were pinned down on that horrific beach. So if it hadn't been for the destroyers, it would have been a whole lot worse. Things like most of the radios were lost in the surf, so there was no one to provide gunfire support. So people were innovating at the time. The U.S. destroyer was in close to the beach, saw a tank firing at a position and went, well, must be bad guys where that guy shot. So the destroyer unloads a whole broadside into that position. The tank fires at another spot. The destroyer fires into that position, at which point the tank commander pops a hatch, waves at the destroyer, and wherever that tank fired, the destroyer would unload, a whole broadside, into it. But that was completely made up on the fly, and all kinds of things like had that happen between the Army and the Navy to make these operations work. So that's the thing.
The dirty little secret also that a lot of folks don't understand is that, other than maybe when Navy plays Air Force or Navy plays Army, and there's some banter back and forth about, hey, we're going to kick your butt today or whatever, we really work well together. We have each other's backs. I have an immense number of friends who served in all the services, including Coast Guard, and so we work well together in special missions. But it was important to know what the range of tides were, what the bottom was like, how close could Yogi get with his boat safely, and so it was part of a larger team. It's really kind of a brilliant thing. Paul, any thoughts?
Yes, thank you. I praise the Admiral for raising that point. The common perception is the war started when the men hit the beach and started to move inland. And the essential contribution was the naval and maritime aspect of it. For the 50th anniversary, I put together a book called Assault on Normandy, and it was first-person voices from people in the Navy, the Merchant Marine, the Coast Guard, what have you. And I thank you for mentioning the World War II Museum in New Orleans. It was previously the D-Day Museum. And it was a great source of first-person accounts because of oral histories and what have you. And it was almost virgin territory for me to write that book because people didn't understand how essential, how vital the Navy was to getting there, as he spelled out specifically. And finally, on a completely different note, I would commend the Negro Leagues Museum in Kansas City. It is outstanding.
Yeah, and I'll jump on board that. I'm a student of Negro League Baseball, almost to an obsession. And I have friends who are black and white who share that thought. And so we did a pilgrimage 2 years ago, and we went to the Truman Library, we went to the Jazz Museum, the Negro Museum, and we also went to the World War I Museum. And as wonderful as the New Orleans World War II Museum is, there's a lot to commend with the Kansas City version of World War I. So there's just such a lot of historic content. One of the things that is disconcerting about the Negro League Baseball is we don't have the same actual artifacts as we do in Cooperstown. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But for example, when you look at a dugout scene and you see these uniforms hanging, these are reproductions, not the actual uniforms. But with that said, we're going to be learning so much more because we've consolidated records. Not 10 days ago, Josh Gibson, with his .375 lifetime batting average, became the player with the highest average, and he overtook Ty Cobb, who hit .367. So you're going to learn a lot more about these players, and I know a lot. The Major League Baseball's got a heart for education in this, and there's a lot of good things coming in that regard. Any other thoughts before I turn it back over to Eve?
One more question.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, Adley, you're not reading the you tell me with the EOs of the islands.
Where is it? Where is it on the map?
Yeah, if you know where the Philippines are,
Yeah.
it's to the northeast between Guam and the Philippines. It's technically the Western Caroline Islands.
It's in the north.
You probably don't even know where it is.
And no, it won't flip over. There's no danger of the downside.
Well, if you're wondering, the Dodecanese Islands, they're in the Greek Museum.
Simon Anderson.
Yes, sir.
Yes, so in my research on the rocket boats and stuff, which I've been doing for 20 years, I retired from the Plan Investment Swim. I was business manager. There was 1,000 naval killed at Normandy. Okay, not going on the beach. This is relaying men back and forth over the course of 21 days. That's in another book that I'm doing. But also, it's very important here, this is about the Navy and Army relation. Okay? I think it was 2,500 men killed at Omaha Beach or on D-Day or a couple of days. So 1,000 is a big proportion of those killed. Number two is 12 rocket boats went into Omaha Beach, 12 went into Uintah Beach, and I have all the information on all of those. They were the first ones in. They had the first half hour of the invasion to try to knock out the German pillboxes and fortify houses. And they were successful. There's commendations in the book that I have. But this is a clarification on me because my father was a part of it and trained the yoga.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that. We appreciate that. We're out of time. A couple players that I would have liked to have covered. Gil Hodges, heroic World War II service, heroic. Mickey Vernon, Mickey Cochran lost his son on D-Day. Luke Appling, Stan Musial, Hugh Casey, there's so many more.
Hank Bauer.
Hank Bauer, yeah, absolutely.
Leon Day, who was at.
Yeah, Leon, yep, absolutely. We couldn't cover them all. We so much apologize, but if you gave us more time.
That's where I said it.
But anyway, thank you for those who are live streaming.
Also, well, thank you so much for being here. Thank all of you. Thank you for your service to all of our veterans. Algerstone, it has been an honor. All of you, thank you for being here at the Yogi Berra Museum. Please come back and visit us. I do invite you to tour the museum now while you're here. We'd love to have you stay for the afternoon.
And
Thank you.
remember that this museum is holy. Thanks for your hard work. Yeah, what a pleasure to get to know you. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
You too.